The jungle had always been a mystery to Lieutenant Ibrahim Traore. Beautiful yet dangerous, peaceful yet deceptive. That morning, the sun had not yet fully risen over the mountainous forests of northern Burkina Faso. The cold wind rustled through the leaves of the ancient trees, creating a symphony that only those who truly listened could appreciate. Military patrols in these hill forests were routine, but for Ibrahim, every mission held personal significance. He was young, fearless, and a sincere officer who believed in duty above all else. "There's some movement over here." A soldier pointed toward a cluster of thick bushes, his voice barely above a whisper. The tension in the air was palpable as Ibrahim gripped his rifle and moved forward with measured steps, his boots made soft, impressions in the damp earth, and his breathing was controlled despite the anticipation building in his chest. Between the bushes, an extraordinary scene awaited him. A large, powerful Arctic bear lay wounded, its massive frame heaving with labored breaths. One of its paws was severely injured, torn and bleeding profusely. Blood had pooled around the magnificent creature, staining the forest floor crimson. But what struck Ibrahim most profoundly was what he saw in the bear's eyes. Not fear, but pain. Raw, unbearable pain that transcended species barriers and spoke directly to his soul. The bear groaned and slowly lifted its massive head, looking directly at Ibrahim. In that moment, something indefinable passed between man and beast. Ibrahim felt his rifle grow heavy in his hands, and without conscious thought, he lowered the weapon. The other soldiers watched in stunned silence, their own weapons still trained on the wounded animal. "No," Ibrahim said firmly, his voice cutting through the morning air. "We won't shoot. This creature is wounded, not our enemy." The soldiers exchanged bewildered glances. No military officer in their experience had ever considered helping a wild forest bear, especially one this dangerous and powerful. The creature could easily kill a man with a single swipe of its massive paws, yet their lieutenant was showing it mercy. Ibrahim knelt beside the wounded giant, pulling on his gloves with deliberate care. From his field bag, he extracted a first aid kit, his movements gentle and methodical. The bear watched him with those intelligent, pain-filled eyes, as if trying to understand this unprecedented act of kindness from a human. "By God," Ibrahim whispered to his men, "if this were a human being in such condition, would we abandon them? This, too, is God's creation, deserving of compassion." With infinite patience and surprising tenderness, Ibrahim began cleaning the bear's wounds. The antiseptic stung, but the bear remained remarkably still, as if understanding that this human meant no harm. Ibrahim carefully bandaged the injured paw, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. He then offered the bear water from his canteen, which the animal accepted gratefully, its rough tongue lapping at the precious liquid. The bear's groaning subsided, and its eyes never left Ibrahim's face. There was something almost human in that gaze. Gratitude, recognition, and perhaps the beginning of an impossible bond that would change both their lives forever. The soldiers remained skeptical and fearful. "Sir, please leave it here. It will die in the forest anyway," one of them pleaded, unable to comprehend their commander's actions. Ibrahim's voice was resolute as he stood up, his decision already made. "No, this bear is coming with us." They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from bamboo poles and canvas, carefully lifting the wounded bear onto it. The soldiers were terrified, their hands shaking as they helped transport the massive animal. But Ibrahim's heart was at peace, as if he had laid the foundation for an unseen friendship that would prove more valuable than gold. When the convoy reached the village, people's eyes remained fixed on the wounded but majestic animal. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, while elders shook their heads in amazement. Never had they seen a soldier bring home a wild bear as if it were a wounded comrade. Upon reaching home, Ibrahim carefully placed the bear in a clean, spot in the backyard, creating a comfortable resting area with soft grass and blankets. The bear continued to groan softly, but the restlessness in its eyes had diminished. It seemed to sense safety in this new environment. Ibrahim's mother, Haji Amina, stood at the doorway watching this unprecedented scene unfold. Her weathered face bore the shadows of concern, as if time had revealed something significant to her weathered eyes. She had raised her son to be compassionate, but this exceeded even her expectations. "What have you brought home, my son?" she asked, her tone stern but not unkind. "Mother, it's wounded. If I had left it there, it would have died," Ibrahim replied, gently, his voice carrying the conviction of his beliefs. "Why do you feel the pain of animals more than that of humans?" his mother questioned, probing deeper into her son's motivations. Ibrahim remained silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "Because animals are not hypocrites, mother. They don't deceive or betray. They are pure in their intentions." Haji Amina took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Remember, my son, animals are less dangerous than humans. But some humans are worse than animals. Learn to protect yourself from them." Her words would prove prophetic in ways neither could imagine. That night, Ibrahim arranged blankets, milk, and medicine for the bear. He himself sat in the backyard, keeping vigil over his unlikely patient. The bear lay quietly, but Ibrahim's presence seemed to provide comfort. When Ibrahim finally rose to go inside, a soft sound made him turn back. The bear had struck its wounded paw gently against the ground, as if expressing gratitude. Ibrahim looked back, smiled, and said, "The friendship has already begun." As dawn broke the next day, golden sunlight spread across the courtyard in gentle yellow hues. Birds awakened the atmosphere with their cheerful chirping. In the backyard of Ibrahim Traore's house, the wounded bear lay on a thick mattress with dry grass spread beneath it. Its wound remained deep, but the intensity of its pain had considerably diminished. Every morning, Ibrahim would wake up and first check on his unusual guest. Changing bandages, offering milk, administering medicine, he did everything himself. The soldiers were amazed to see their strict commander caring for a wild animal with such tenderness and dedication. Haji Amina, the matriarch of the house, observed everything. Her face no longer bore severity, but rather the color of contemplation and growing understanding. "Mother, it's eating less. Perhaps it wants something else," Ibrahim asked one day, concerned about the bear's appetite. "It just needs the pain to subside." "When an animal feels trust, the body also comes to peace," his mother replied with a gentle tone that surprised Ibrahim. "So you've accepted that it's not dangerous?" Ibrahim asked with wonder. His mother smiled warmly. "I am a mother, son. If my child places his hand on something, how can I not believe that it's not an enemy?" That afternoon, Ibrahim's younger sister Zainab, only 12 years old, came to see the bear. In her small hands was a bowl filled with honey, her eyes bright with curiosity and innocence. "Would you like some honey?" she asked softly, addressing the bear as if it were a dear friend. Ibrahim started with concern. "Zainab, stay back. It could still be dangerous." But the bear lifted its head, closed its eyes, and began licking the honey with its tongue extended. The sweetness seemed to bring it genuine pleasure, and for the first time since its rescue, something like contentment crossed its massive features. Zainab laughed with delight. "It loves honey just like me." From that day forward, Zainab became a special presence for the bear. She would visit every day, telling it stories about her school, sharing her daily adventures, and the bear would listen in peaceful silence. Sometimes, she would even place her small hand on its massive paw, and the bear would remain completely still, as if understanding the precious trust being placed in it. One day, Ibrahim sat in the garden watching this extraordinary interaction when his mother approached him. "Have you ever thought, son, when an animal trusts humans?" she asked thoughtfully. When we feel their pain without understanding their language, Ibrahim replied, the wisdom of his words surprising even himself. His mother nodded approvingly. Then also remember this: the kindness you're showing will not be forgotten by nature. 3 weeks passed in this manner. The bear's wound had completely healed, and it had begun sitting up and drinking water on its own. Whenever Ibrahim approached, it would place its massive paw on his shoulder, like a friend placing a hand on a shoulder to say, "I am with you." Zainab now called it her companion openly. "I won't let you go anywhere," she would tell the bear, her young heart forming attachments that knew no boundaries of species. One night, Ibrahim sat in the courtyard drinking tea when the bear slowly approached and laid its neck across his leg. The bear's breath was warm, carrying an odd sense of peace and contentment. "What's the matter?" Ibrahim asked gently, running his hand over the bear's massive head. Ibrahim placed his hand on the bear's forehead and thought to himself, if all humans in the world were like this, perhaps there would be no wars. In this household, the bear was no longer just a guest, it had become a family member. But fate's wheel never stops in one place. Time changes, seasons change, and someday everyone must return to where they belong. The 5th week had begun, and the bear was now completely healthy. Its paw had healed perfectly, the wounds were sealed, and it appeared more robust and energetic than ever before. But a conflict was awakening in Ibrahim's heart. On one side was his mother's wisdom, on the other was his sister Zainab's love, and in between was that silent relationship that had flourished between human and animal over time. One morning, Haji Amina called Ibrahim to her. She held a cup of tea in her hands, her tone gentle but serious. "Son, the time has come. Send it back to its world now." Ibrahim remained silent, avoiding her eyes. "Mother, what if it doesn't want to go elsewhere? What if it stays here?" "It belongs to the forest, son. What we consider imprisonment is freedom for it," his mother said lovingly, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You cannot keep a wild creature captive, no matter how much love exists between you." When Zainab heard this, her world seemed to collapse. She threw her arms around the bear's neck, tears streaming down her young face. "No, I won't go away. This is my friend. Not a brother, but like a brother." The bear stood silently. But there seemed to be moisture floating in its eyes, as if it too understood that this magical chapter was drawing to a close. That night passed in silence. No words were spoken, only the sound of breathing and heartbeats could be heard. The weight of impending separation hung heavy in the air. The next morning, Ibrahim made his decision. He brought out the car, spread a soft sheet in the back for the bear, and carefully helped it climb in. Zainab silently hugged the bear one last time and stepped back, her eyes ready to overflow with tears she was trying so hard to hold back. His mother stood at the door and said just one sentence. "Son, remember, if you are sincere, nature will surely respond someday." The car reached the inner parts of the forest where the tree shadows had grown deep and the air held moisture from the morning dew. Ibrahim stopped the car, opened the door, and helped the bear down. It came out silently, paused for a moment, then began looking around at its natural habitat. "You are free now. Go back to your world," Ibrahim said, his voice thick with emotion. He was trying to suppress. The bear took a few steps forward, then turned and looked into Ibrahim's eyes. In those eyes was gratitude, the pain of separation, and an unspoken loyalty that transcended the boundaries between species. The bear slowly raised its paw and struck the ground gently, as if making a promise or covenant. Ibrahim also raised his hand in response. "If we ever meet again, remember that I am the one who loved you like a brother." The bear silently disappeared into the bushes, leaving only its footprints as evidence of the extraordinary bond they had shared. During the return journey, Ibrahim didn't look back once, but there was a strange peace in his heart, as if something had been taken away, but a new hope had also been born. Upon reaching home, Zainab asked only one question. Did it cry? Ibrahim paused before answering. No, but what was in its eyes could make even a human weep. His mother looked toward the sky and whispered softly, Relationships are not made by blood but by feelings, and feelings return in time. The bear was gone, but its shadow never left that house. The memory of those extraordinary weeks would become a source of strength and wisdom that would serve Ibrahim in ways he could never have imagined. After the bear's departure, Ibrahim Traore's life took a different direction. There was a silence within him, but it was a silence deeper than noise itself. The quiet of a man who had learned profound truths about loyalty, compassion, and the connections that transcend species barriers. Time passed, and he continued to rise through the military ranks, but the longing for humanity, justice, and truth grew stronger in his heart. He was no longer just a military officer. He had become a man who understood from within that oppression, regardless of its form, ultimately spreads and corrupts everything it touches. His experience with the bear had taught him that true loyalty and genuine relationships were rare and precious commodities in a world increasingly driven by greed and self-interest. During this time, Burkina Faso's political system had become victim to the worst kinds of corruption. Gold mines were under the control of foreign companies who extracted the nation's wealth while leaving its people in poverty. Forests were being cut down and sold abroad, destroying the natural heritage that belonged to future generations. Innocent farmers were being displaced from their ancestral lands to make way for foreign interests and corrupt local officials. Everything was for sale: conscience, land, and the people's trust. The very soul of the nation was being auctioned to the highest bidder, while those in power grew fat on the suffering of their own people. Ibrahim witnessed all these activities in his military reports, but he was ordered to remain silent. The corruption went to the very top of the government, and speaking out meant career suicide at best, death at worst. But he knew that those who remain silent become accomplices to crime. The lessons he had learned from his relationship with the bear, about loyalty, integrity, and standing up for those who cannot defend themselves, burned within him like an unquenchable fire. One day, he made a decision that would change everything. He organized a press conference, standing before the cameras as a colonel, knowing full well that military regulations kept him away from politics. But there was a storm in his heart that could no longer be contained. Standing before the TV cameras, he declared, I have a gun in my hand but a pen in my heart. I will no longer remain silent. Gold, oil, wood, all of this is the future of our children, and you have sold it all. The entire country fell into stunned silence. For the first time, someone had placed the internal truth before the people with such clarity and courage. The impact was immediate and electric. That same night, orders came from headquarters to suspend Ibrahim, place him under surveillance, and charge him in a military court. The establishment was terrified of what they had unleashed, but nature had planned something else entirely. When news of Ibrahim's suspension reached the public, citywide protests began erupting across the nation. University students, farmers, workers, all raised their voices as one unified force. Ibrahim is our representative. He cannot be silenced, they chanted in streets from the capital to the smallest villages. One day, thousands of people marched through the streets of the capital. In their hands was only one image, that of Ibrahim Traore. A veteran teacher told the media, "This struggle is not just Ibrahim's, it's ours. The one who saved the bear can save our future too." The military establishment found itself in trouble, as senior generals came under unprecedented pressure. They couldn't have imagined that a simple colonel would gain such massive public support. The story of Ibrahim and the bear had spread throughout the country, becoming a symbol of the kind of leader the people desperately needed. Someone who showed compassion to all of God's creatures and would fight for justice regardless of the personal cost. That night, Ibrahim sat alone in his room, head bowed before his mother's photograph, reading quietly with tears in his eyes. "Mother, I spoke the truth. Now let's see where this truth takes me." A soldier knocked on the door. "Sir, people outside are chanting slogans in your support." Ibrahim stood up, put on his uniform, and said slowly, "If the price of speaking the truth is life, then I will pay that price. But I will not become a witness to lies." The streets were noisy, but that noise wasn't just slogans. It was the sound of awakening. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, different classes of society were gathering around one person. Students, workers, farmers, even small businessmen and retired soldiers were all saying the same thing. "We want justice, and our representative is Ibrahim Traore." Ibrahim himself was amazed by the response. He had merely spoken the truth, but that truth had now become a storm that was reshaping the political landscape of his nation. His every speech reached millions of people. His videos went viral on social media, and the people began to see him, not just as an officer, but as hope itself. Hope for a better future, hope for justice, hope for a nation that could belong to its people rather than foreign interests and corrupt elites. One day, Ibrahim gave a speech at a university that would become legendary. His words touched hearts and awakened minds. "This is not just a war for gold. This is a war for our generation's dreams. If we don't wake up today, our silence tomorrow will become our slavery. We have allowed foreign companies to rape our land, while our children go to bed hungry. We have allowed corrupt officials to sell our birthright for personal gain. But no more. The time for silence has passed." After the speech, students prayed for him, and many young people started working for him that very day. The Traore movement came into existence, a grassroots organization that spread across the country like wildfire. Meanwhile, anxiety was growing in government circles and among the corrupt elite. They began resorting to accusations and character assassination. "Ibrahim is creating rebellion in the army. He's a foreign agent. He's a threat to peace and stability." But times had changed. Ibrahim now had not only common people, but also lower-ranking soldiers standing with him. They sent secret messages. "Sir, we are with you. We are tired of protecting those who are selling us out." Ibrahim refused to stage a military coup. His vision was clear and principled. "We will not rebel. We will bring awakening. People's power is stronger than guns. Democracy, not dictatorship, is the path forward." His simplicity, honesty, and fearless approach won hearts everywhere. Women showed their children his pictures while praying for his success. Elderly people said, "Perhaps this is the day we dreamed of. Someone who speaks our language and listens to our hearts." Then came the day everyone had been waiting for with bated breath. Millions of people gathered in the capital, demanding a referendum in front of Parliament. Media from around the world arrived to report on this unprecedented popular uprising. Ibrahim Traore was publicly nominated as the transitional president by popular acclaim, but his response showed the depth of his character and commitment to democratic principles. "I don't want the presidency through acclamation," Ibrahim declared, immediately. "I want to serve the people. If the people want to make me president, then first hold free elections. Let the people decide through their votes, not through the streets." The country was in upheaval as international pressure mounted. Finally, the transitional government announced elections within 1 month. During this period, Ibrahim made a historic speech at a massive rally. "My hope is not in guns nor in chairs of power. My hope is in you. If you have awakened, then I don't need any position. You yourselves are a revolution. You have the power to transform this nation through your unity and determination. When the elections were held, that revolution was channeled into votes. Ibrahim Traore, a soldier, a son and a sister's friend, became the country's youngest and most voted for president through the people's democratic choice. The boy who had once saved a wounded bear in the forest had now been chosen by his people to heal a wounded nation. The parallels were not lost on anyone. Just as he had shown compassion to a creature that others feared, he had shown compassion to a people that others had exploited. Just as he had nursed the bear back to health through patience and care, he now promised to nurse his nation back to health through the same virtues. As President Ibrahim Traore, he immediately began implementing reforms to return the nation's wealth to its people. He renegotiated mining contracts, established environmental protections for the forests, and began programs to return displaced farmers to their lands. His approval ratings soared as ordinary citizens finally saw a government that worked for them rather than against them. However, his success made him dangerous enemies. Foreign corporations that had been extracting Burkina Faso's wealth saw their profits threatened. Corrupt officials who had been enriching themselves at the nation's expense found their sources of income cut off. A conspiracy began to form in the shadows, involving both foreign interests and domestic traitors. 1 year into his presidency, Ibrahim was scheduled to make an inspection tour of the northern mining regions, the same forests where he had once rescued the wounded bear. His security detail was led by officers he had trusted for years, men who had served with him since his early military career. The night before departure, Ibrahim called his mother. Her voice carried that familiar note of concern that mothers reserve for their children facing danger. "Be careful, my son. Remember what I told you about humans being more dangerous than animals." Ibrahim smiled, trying to reassure her. "Mother, I'm going with the heart of a lion. Don't worry." But deep in his heart, his mother's advice echoed like a warning bell. The next day, the convoy entered the dense forest. The mountain roads were narrow, surrounded by thick clusters of trees, and filled with the same air that carried the fragrance of old memories, memories of his beloved bear. As they traveled deeper into the forest, Ibrahim began to feel a strange uneasiness. The officer's eyes seemed evasive, avoiding direct contact. The driver's forehead was beaded with sweat despite the cool forest air. Something was terribly wrong, but Ibrahim's trusting nature made him dismiss his growing suspicions. Finally, the convoy stopped at a desolate location, far from any settlement or main road. "Why have we stopped here?" Ibrahim asked, his presidential authority clear in his voice. One officer kept his eyes downcast. "Sir, the road ahead is blocked. We need to return from here." Ibrahim looked into their eyes and saw the truth. "You're lying to me." Suddenly, another officer placed his hand on Ibrahim's shoulder, not in respect or protection, but as part of a trap. Behind him, the driver approached with a syringe filled with a powerful sedative, intending to incapacitate the president. They had sworn to protect. After a brief struggle, Ibrahim fell to the ground, the drug coursing through his system. His vision blurred as consciousness faded, but he could hear the cold words of one of his trusted officers. "Forgive us, Mr. President. This forest will now become your grave." They dragged Ibrahim from the vehicle, left him among the dense trees, and drove away. Their plan was simple and cruel. Let the forest predators finish what they had started, while they collected their payment from foreign agents for eliminating the obstacle to continued exploitation of Burkina Faso's resources. Ibrahim lay semi-conscious on the forest floor, his body soaked in sweat and the betrayal settling deep into his heart, along with the drug's effects. Everything before his eyes was blurry and distorted. Sometimes he could hear the frightening sounds of birds, sometimes rustling in the bushes, and occasionally the growling of some predator in the distance. In that moment, he could only hear one thing clearly: the echo of his mother's advice. "Son, animals are less dangerous than humans." His eyes were heavy with the drug's effects, but suddenly there was movement in the bushes, the sound of breaking twigs, the thump of heavy footsteps on the ground. Ibrahim tried to open his eyes in his broken consciousness, and his gaze fixed on a blurred shadow. It was a bear, but this was no stranger. There were signs of recognition on its face, and on its paw was the faint mark of an old wound. This was the same bear. His bear. His friend from years ago had found him in his darkest hour. Friend. Escaped from Ibrahim's lips in a soft whisper. The bear moved toward him and gently ran its tongue over his forehead, as if cleaning a wound, just as Ibrahim had once cleaned its wounds. Then, using its paws to clear away bushes, it placed fresh fruits that had fallen nearby in front of Ibrahim, offering sustenance to its old savior. Tears came to Ibrahim's eyes. He thought this must be a dream, but the bear's warm breath and gentle touch felt utterly real. The bear had changed its growl to a strange, soft sound, as if saying, "Get up, you are not alone." Ibrahim gathered courage and sipped some fruit juice, slowly restoring his breath. He looked into the bear's eyes and for a moment remembered all. Those days when he had lifted the wounded bear, bandaged it, and let his sister Zainab play with it. Ibrahim's eyes were moist. Mother was right. Animals are more loyal than humans. But the wonder was that the bear had not come alone. Soon more bears began emerging from the shadows of the trees, 1, 2, then 10, 20. Their eyes held a gleam, as if they had all gathered here at the first bear's signal. This was no ordinary crowd. This was the forest's army. The original bear stood at the front like a commander. It let out a loud roar, and all the others responded in unison. The forest shook with their collective call. Ibrahim managed to sit up with support. He said to himself, "This is the moment my mother mentioned. Nature is returning the favor." The bears sat in a circle around him as if protecting him. In the distance, gunshots could be heard. It seemed the corrupt officers and traders were still nearby, loading trucks with stolen gold to sell to foreign agents. The lead bear roared once more, and the bear army seemed ready for battle. A new courage rose in Ibrahim's heart. "Is this real? Have all of you gathered for me?" he asked himself. The bear, as if reading his thoughts, slowly approached Ibrahim and touched his shoulder with its paw. Exactly like a human placing a hand on a shoulder to give courage. Ibrahim bowed his head and said, "If this is war, then I am ready too." The forest's silence had been broken. Ibrahim knew he was not alone. He had an entire army with him. But this army was not of humans. It was the bear's own army, and the real beginning of the game was about to start. Laughter echoed through the trees as the corrupt officers divided their stolen gold, confident that Ibrahim was already dead or dying in the forest. But they didn't know that the forest would not remain silent. Ibrahim leaned against a tree trunk, his breathing now under control, but his body still weak from the drugs. He looked at his friend, the bear he had once saved. "Will you really do all this for me?" he whispered. The lead bear let out such a roar that all the other bears stood up together. The leaves of the trees trembled, birds flew into the sky, and the very ground seemed to shake. This was not the sound of an ordinary animal. This was a declaration of war, a resolve awakened in Ibrahim's heart. He tightened his boots, pulled out a small pistol from his pocket, and said under his breath, "I am with you too. This war is not just yours. It's mine as well." The bear army began moving silently through the bushes. Their footsteps shook the ground like thunder. As soon as they reached near the camp, the lead bear raised its paws in the air and let out a trembling roar. In an instant, all the bears attacked. Panic broke out in the camp. A traitor soldier screamed, "What is this? Bears!" The next moment, He was crushed under the paws of a giant bear. Guns started firing, but in the darkness of night, the bears moved like shadows. With each of their strikes, guards fell to the ground. Ibrahim watched all this from behind a rock. The soldier within him had awakened. He pulled out his pistol and aimed at a traitor who was about to shoot at a bear. The sound of the gunshot echoed, and the man fell to the ground. The lead bear climbed onto a truck where bags of gold were kept. With its powerful paws, it overturned the truck, and golden gleams spread across the ground. The traitor soldiers lunged at the gold, but other bears pounced on them. The air was filled with a symphony of bullets, screams, and roars. This was no ordinary fight. This was nature's justice being served. One officer, crawling on the ground, screamed, "Leave us alone! We were just following orders!" Ibrahim approached him, placed the pistol against his forehead, and said, "Animals never betray their leader. It was you humans who sold your land and your blood." The officer fell silent, his eyes cast down in shame and terror. Within moments, the camp was deserted. The bears had destroyed everything, overturned vehicles, and rendered the traitors helpless. Those who had thought yesterday that the forest was under their control found that today the same forest had swallowed them whole. Ibrahim approached his bear friend, placed his hand on its forehead, and said softly, "You have delivered justice." "Thank you, friend." The bear breathed on his face as if saying in response, "This is just the beginning." The forest became quiet again, but that night a new chapter of history was being written. A chapter in which the president was not alone, but had an army with him. However, that army was not of humans, but of bears. The forest atmosphere still echoed with screams and roars. The sound of gunfire had died down, smoke clouds floated in the air, and golden gleam lay scattered on the ground, as if nature had displayed the traitors' greed on the floor of their own destruction. Ibrahim stood leaning against a large tree in the shadows. His clothes were dusty, his face bore marks of wounds, but his eyes held that light that only exists in the eyes of a true soldier. Around him stood dozens of bears, silent but ready, like guardians of a court of justice. The remaining traitors from the camp now lay scattered on the ground like broken chains. Some were half dead, others trembling with fear. Their hands were raised in surrender, their eyes begging for mercy. One officer spoke through tears. "Mr. President, forgive us. We were forced. We were given orders." Ibrahim slowly approached him, while the bear's roars made the silence even more terrifying. He looked into the officer's eyes and said in a cold tone, "Animals never deceived me, but you sold your homeland, sold your land, sold your blood. You are no longer worthy of being called human." The officer fell to the ground, and one of the bears struck the ground with its paw while roaring, as if nature's judgment had been pronounced. The traitors were surrounded and brought to the center. The lead bear stood at the front, its eyes blazing like fire. It let out a roar, and all the other bears joined in response. The forest trembled with their collective call. This was the announcement of the court of justice. Ibrahim looked toward the sky and said in a loud voice, "O earth, bear witness. These are the ones who tore open your chest. O sky, bear witness. These are the ones who sold their generations. Today the time for justice has come." The bears moved forward together and attacked the traitors. The sounds of screams echoed through the night darkness, but these were the screams of justice. Justice that had been suppressed for years, but now nature itself had implemented. Within moments, everything was over. The camp was deserted, vehicles destroyed, and only silence remained on the ground. The bears quietly stood back in a circle, as if waiting for their leader Ibrahim's command. Ibrahim took a deep breath and pointed toward the gold scattered on the ground, saying, "This gold is no longer for anyone to sell. This is the people's. Trust." Then he looked at the corpses of the traitors and said, "Remember, The one who betrays is always human, never an animal. These words echoed in the air as if being written into history. The lead bear slowly approached Ibrahim and placed its head on his shoulder. In that moment, tears involuntarily flowed from Ibrahim's eyes, tears not of weakness, but of gratitude. "Friend, you have repaid my debt," Ibrahim said softly. The bear army gradually began returning to the forest darkness. But as they left, their eyes held that promise that this relationship would never break. Ibrahim stood alone in that empty camp, but he knew he was never alone. The forest was with him. Nature was with him. Dawn was breaking. The forest night had ended, but the scenes were still alive in Ibrahim Traore's eyes. The bear's roars, the traitor's screams, and the scattered gleam of gold that had exposed their greed. Ibrahim's steps were weak, but his heart was strong as steel. He placed his hand on the ground and said, "O Earth, today you have delivered justice yourself." A few hours later, a military unit reached the location. The soldiers were stunned when they saw the president alive but alone. No guards, no convoy, just a destroyed camp and scattered bodies. They couldn't understand how all this had happened. Ibrahim simply said, "Nature has pronounced judgment. I'll tell you the rest in the capital." When he returned to the capital, millions of people were present on the city streets to welcome him. Everyone's lips carried the same phrase: "Our president has survived. God has protected him." The next day, the National Assembly Hall was packed to capacity. Media representatives, ministers, military officers, and common people, all were waiting for this moment. Ibrahim Traore stepped onto the stage, exhaustion visible in his eyes but fire in his voice. The hall fell into complete silence. Standing before the microphone, he declared, "My fellow countrymen, I want to share a truth with you. Last night, when the traitors left me in the forest to die, I was not alone. That forest, which we consider silent, raised its voice. Those animals we call dangerous, they saved me." Whispers began in the hall, but Ibrahim's voice became thunder. "Yes, I returned with an army of bears. That bear I had saved years ago repaid its debt. And let me tell you, animals never betray, only humans betray." These words struck like lightning. The faces of assembly ministers turned pale. They knew the traitors had been exposed. Ibrahim looked toward the people and continued, "Today I want to give you a lesson. If the wild animals of nature's forest can remain loyal to their leader, then why can't we humans? Why do we sell our land, our gold, our children's future?" The hall erupted in applause. People stood up, tears in their eyes and fire in their hearts. A veteran farmer stood up and shouted, "Mr. President, we are with you. This land will not be sold anymore." Ibrahim bowed his head and said, "This struggle is not mine alone. It's ours. I was alone, but the forest stood with me. Now if you stand with me, no power can make us bow." The speech ended, but its effects were just beginning. The next day, newspapers ran headlines: "President and Bear, a covenant of loyalty." Zainab, his sister, had tears in her eyes when she heard all this. She knew their friend had returned and kept the promise he had once made. Haji Amina simply said, "Didn't I tell you, son? Nature never forgets a favor." This story spread throughout the country. Children started buying bear toys, pictures went up in the streets, and Ibrahim included the bear's symbol in the national emblem, a reminder that this land is protected, not just by strength, but by loyalty and justice. Word of Ibrahim's miraculous survival and the bear army's intervention spread far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. International media descended upon the small West African nation, eager to report on what many called the most extraordinary political story of the century. News anchors struggled to explain how a president had been saved by wild animals, while political analysts debated the symbolic significance of nature defending human integrity. The story resonated particularly strongly across Africa, where many communities still maintained deep spiritual connections to the natural world. Tribal elders nodded knowingly, saying this was proof that the ancestors and the spirits of the land still watched over those who acted with pure hearts. Foreign corporations that had been exploiting Burkina Faso's resources found themselves under unprecedented international scrutiny. Environmental groups seized upon Ibrahim's story as evidence that nature itself was fighting back against ecological destruction. The stock prices of several multinational mining companies plummeted as investors worried about the stability of their African operations. Meanwhile, Ibrahim used his newfound international platform to advocate for a new model of development, one that respected both human dignity and natural harmony. At the United Nations, he delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. The world has forgotten an ancient truth. We are not separate from nature, we are part of it. When we heal the earth, we heal ourselves. When we protect the forests, we protect our future. My friend the bear taught me that loyalty transcends species, that compassion creates bonds stronger than steel, and that justice will always find a way to prevail. The speech received a standing ovation, and several world leaders privately approached Ibrahim to learn more about his philosophy of governance. A new term entered political discourse: ecological leadership, the idea that true leaders must consider the welfare of all living beings, not just human constituents. Back in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim's survival story had galvanized the population in ways no political campaign ever could. The image of their president standing alongside forest bears became a powerful symbol of resistance against corruption and foreign exploitation. Murals depicting Ibrahim and his bear friend appeared on walls throughout the country, often accompanied by slogans like "Nature's Choice" and "Loyalty Beyond Species." Ibrahim implemented sweeping reforms with unprecedented popular support. He established the Bear Guard, an elite environmental protection unit whose members wore patches depicting the bear that had saved their president. These units patrolled the forests, preventing illegal logging and protecting wildlife habitats. The gold mines were nationalized, with profits directed toward education, healthcare, and infrastructure development rather than foreign shareholders. For the first time in decades, ordinary citizens saw tangible improvements in their daily lives as roads were built, schools were equipped, and hospitals were staffed. Most importantly, Ibrahim established a new form of governance he called natural democracy, a system where environmental impact was considered in every policy decision, where indigenous wisdom was consulted alongside modern expertise, and where the rights of future generations were legally protected. The transformation was remarkable. International visitors noted that Burkina Faso had become one of the most politically stable and economically equitable nations in West Africa. Crime rates dropped as employment opportunities increased. Educational achievement soared as children grew up believing they could make a difference in the world. Ibrahim often reflected on the lessons his bear friend had taught him, developing what he called the philosophy of the bear, principles that guided both his personal conduct and his governance. First principle: loyalty without conditions. Just as the bear had returned to help him despite being released into the wild, true relationships transcend immediate self-interest. A leader must be loyal to their people's welfare, even when it's politically costly. Second principle: strength in service of protection. Bears are incredibly powerful, but Ibrahim's friend had used its strength only to defend the innocent and punish the guilty. Power should be used to protect the vulnerable, not to dominate them. Third principle: memory of kindness. The bear had never forgotten the compassion shown to it years earlier. Leaders must remember that every act of kindness or cruelty has lasting consequences that may return unexpectedly. Fourth principle, natural justice. In nature, balance is eventually restored. Those who take more than their share ultimately face consequences, while those who give generously are rewarded in unexpected ways. Fifth principle, unity across differences. The bear army had consisted of different species and sizes, but they had united for a common purpose. Human society could learn from this example of cooperation despite diversity. These principles were taught in schools throughout Burkina Faso and eventually influenced political movements across Africa and beyond. Universities began offering courses in ecological leadership, using Ibrahim's story as a primary case study. Not everyone was pleased with Ibrahim's success. Foreign intelligence agencies working with displaced corrupt officials launched several attempts to destabilize his government. They spread disinformation claiming that Ibrahim was mentally unstable, that the bear story was fabricated, and that his reforms were destroying the economy. Some neighboring countries, whose own corrupt leaders felt threatened by Ibrahim's example, imposed economic sanctions and closed their borders to Burkina Faso's trade. International media outlets funded by corporate interests published articles questioning Ibrahim's mental health and portraying him as a dangerous radical. During one particularly difficult period, when food shortages resulted from the trade blockades, Ibrahim's approval ratings began to decline. Opposition groups organized protests, and some of his own ministers suggested compromising with foreign corporations to restore economic stability. It was during this crisis that Ibrahim made another journey to the forest, not because he was in physical danger, but because he needed spiritual guidance. He went alone this time, walking the same paths where he had first encountered his wounded bear friend years earlier. As he sat in meditation beside a clear stream, he heard a familiar sound, the gentle approach of heavy paws on forest floor. His friend had returned, older now, but still magnificent. The bear approached and sat beside Ibrahim, just as it had done years ago when it was wounded and vulnerable. In that moment of communion, Ibrahim found his answer. He would not compromise his principles for temporary relief. He would trust that justice and truth would ultimately prevail, just as they had in the forest that night when traitors had left him for dead. Returning to the capital with renewed determination, Ibrahim addressed the nation once more. My people, we face pressure from those who profit from our suffering. They want us to return to the old ways of corruption and exploitation. But remember, the forest stood with us when we were abandoned. Nature itself chose our path. We will not betray that trust. His words rekindled the people's faith in their chosen leader. Citizens organized voluntary work brigades to maintain infrastructure during the trade blockades. Farmers shared their harvests with urban populations. Students and teachers worked together to ensure schools remained open despite budget constraints. Most remarkably, similar movements began emerging in other African nations. Leaders inspired by Ibrahim's example began implementing their own versions of ecological governance. A network of bear nations, countries committed to environmental protection and social justice, began forming informal alliances. The corporate interests that had seemed so powerful found themselves facing a coordinated resistance movement that transcended national boundaries. Environmental activists worldwide adopted the bear as a symbol of nature's resistance to exploitation. Indigenous communities shared their traditional ecological knowledge with governments willing to listen. What had begun as one man's compassionate act toward a wounded animal had grown into a global movement for environmental justice and authentic democracy. 5 years after that fateful night in the forest, Ibrahim stood once again at the United Nations, but this time as the leader of a continental alliance of African nations committed to sustainable development. The Accra Accords, named after the city where they were signed, established new international norms for resource extraction, environmental protection, and indigenous rights. Beside him on the podium was a photograph of his bear friend, who had passed away peacefully in the forest the previous year. Rangers had found the magnificent creature lying beside the same stream where Ibrahim often went for contemplation, as if it had chosen that sacred place for its final rest. In his final major international speech, Ibrahim reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "When I was a young lieutenant in the forest, I thought I was saving one wounded animal. I did not know that this act of compassion would save my life, transform my nation, and inspire a movement for justice across our continent. This teaches us that we never know which of our actions will prove most important. Therefore, we must treat every being with the dignity and compassion we would want for ourselves. My friend the bear is no longer with us in body, but its spirit lives on in every forest we protect, every child we educate, every community we empower. The bond between human and animal, between civilization and nature, is not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be celebrated. Today, I announce that I will not seek re-election as president of Burkina Faso. My people have learned to govern themselves with wisdom and compassion. My role now is to serve the broader family of African nations as we build a future worthy of our children and our forests." The announcement surprised many, but those who knew Ibrahim best understood. Like his bear friend, he had completed his mission and was ready to return to the forest, not as an exile, but as a guardian of the sacred bond between humanity and nature. Ibrahim Traore returned to his family home, where his mother, Haji Amina, now elderly but still wise, welcomed him with the words, "You kept faith with your friend, and your friend kept faith with you. This is how it should be." His sister Zainab, now a teacher herself, had established the Bear School, an educational institution that taught children both academic subjects and ecological wisdom. Students learned mathematics by calculating forest growth rates, studied history through the lens of human-environment relationships, and practiced leadership by caring for rescued animals. In the backyard where the wounded bear had once recovered, Ibrahim created a meditation garden. A simple stone marker bore the inscription, "Here began a friendship that changed the world. May all beings find such loyalty, compassion, and courage." Visitors from around the world came to hear Ibrahim's story and learn about ecological leadership. He would tell them, "The forest taught me that we are all connected, human and animal, leader and citizen, present and future. When we act from this understanding, miracles become possible." On quiet evenings, Ibrahim would sit in the garden and listen to the sounds of the forest beyond. Sometimes, he could swear he heard a familiar gentle roar carried on the wind, his friend's voice reminding him that some bonds transcend even death, and that nature's justice, though sometimes delayed, is always certain. The bear and the president had become legend. But more than that, they had become proof that in a world often dominated by greed and betrayal, loyalty and compassion remain the most powerful forces for transformation. Their story continues to inspire new generations of leaders who understand that true strength comes not from dominance over nature, but from harmony with it. And in the forests of Burkina Faso, where ancient trees whisper stories to those who know how to listen, the echo of that impossible friendship still resonates, a reminder that sometimes the most profound political revolutions begin with a simple act of kindness toward a wounded creature in need of help. Thus, history recorded the tale of Ibrahim Traore and his bear friend, a story that proved that relationships built on compassion and loyalty can change not just individual lives, but the destiny of nations and the course of history itself.